So please welcome Holger Weiss on stage. He's a fellow Berliner, and he's going to, thank you very much, and he's going to talk about the connected cars and why they are entering us in the third age of mobility and why they're going to change everything. I believe that I very closely share, of course. So I'm very excited, and I hope I can also learn a few new things. And maybe he's also sharing a few things about his new startup in that domain. So thank you very much for coming to Cluj. The stage is all yours, Holger. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you. So that's a kind of danger to tell about connected mobility in front of you. I mean, and Tim is also around here. So good morning, everybody. So if you ever wondered if this would be the tech conference, the guy who spoke before me, he gave the proof, right? Didn't understand a word. That's the fate of a guy who's in tech but doesn't read code. What I actually wanted to talk about today a little bit is about something that is in our everyday life, like water, like bread, like eating, like drinking, which is mobility, and we consider it as something that we just have learned to live with and which will fundamentally change over the next years, and we will all see how this will change. So, about 6,000 years ago, mankind started with what I call the first age of mobility. I mean, before they were able to walk, right? That's also longer. But with inventing the wheel, right, mobility changed dramatically for mankind, and that was a big breakthrough in that term. So long distance were possible to cross. Logistics turned into another century, another age, and everything was different suddenly. And then, for a long time, nothing happened. Actually, for almost 6,000 years, right? The only thing is that mankind then understood to use horses to pull the carriages. But other than that, 6,000 years, no improvement. So then, a German guy, Karl Benz, invented the engine. And out of the blue, he replaced horses by this engine, and instead of having 1, 2, or 8 horsepowers, machines became 30 horsepowers, 100 horsepowers, 300, 400, 600,000 as we know it today, right? And what we have today, actually, this year, last year, we have the internet arriving in the car. And that's what I'm calling the third age of mobility. And in the same way, and sometimes when I'm giving these speeches or talking to people, I'm surprised also in the industry, especially in the industry, how little people understood the impact of what's going on here. And it's in the same way as Karl Benz replaced the horses, how this will influence the way we are mobile. In a way, we are facing a quantum shift in everything that we know being mobile as it is today. So, to look a little bit deeper into that, right, we should structure it a little bit and see, okay, there are different types of mobility and there are different ways of being mobile. And if you draw the cluster like that, you also could take other dimensions, right? Then in each of that clusters, we have revolutions ongoing at the moment, right? Take Hyperloop. I mean, Hyperloop is a fundamental Star Trek thing, right? I mean, you haven't believed into that until 2 years ago. And then Elon Musk, again, who promoted it, he's not the one who came really up with the idea, but he's a very popular poster boy in mobility, as we know, said, okay, we're going to do that, right? And I met last summer a guy who's in the board of Hyperloop, great guy from Italy, Bebop, and we talked in Berlin, and I said, how's the project ongoing, etc., plannings and renderings and so on. And he said, guess what? We will have, in 2016, the first Hyperloop tests going. I said, what? That's reality. So, and you all saw that video a couple of days ago about this test ride of the Hyperloop technology. Uber changed the way we are mobile, right? I mean, no matter where you are, I mean, no negotiation, everything that you experienced in traveling before is disappearing, so no question about is it a safe cab, not a safe cab, nothing about that. It influences the way we are mobile and our mobility. So, all this is being driven by some Loud enough. Ah, I'm back. Good. So there are some megatrends, and it's important to understand, if you want to understand mobility, to look into that. So connectivity. I mean, connectivity is not a megatrend. It's reality. I know this. But connectivity in cars is a megatrend. Why is that? Because the car is not your living room, right? It's a moving target. There are tunnels. There are white spots in connectivity, etc. And it's also a question of bandwidth. We have connectivity in cars for almost 20 years, 25 years, but not in the way as we have it today. We can update cars, right? Tesla is a great example that they built something that looks like a car as if it's a smartphone. So, and if there is a problem, right, then they do an update overnight, and the problem is solved the very next day. The perception of what this means in how we are handling mobility and how we are handling this, what our parents and the generations before us embraced as the most expensive thing they bought in life, a car, will change dramatically, right? Predictive maintenance. BMW has a program for almost 10 years running where they can predict if your respective car will have a repair case or a broken thing, because they just measure by how many cars of that series, of that period car model was built, has issues, and then they predict this. This is AI in its pure form. Swarm intelligence, car-to-car communication. Someone talked about this yesterday. Car-to-infrastructure communication. So it's interesting that you have traffic information today, but someone has to tell the guys who are doing the traffic information in your navigation system, there's an accident, right? Which doesn't help you if you're already in the traffic jam. But what is if the car who's just passing the accident can inform all the cars behind just by car-to-car communication? That's a big impact. Mobility. Mobility as a service, right? Car sharing. I'm coming from Berlin, very popular. It's the capital of the world of car sharing. I think we have 17 different car sharing companies. Mobility turns into a service. You have the bicycles here. It's exactly the same. We have the bicycles in Berlin. I lived in Paris without a bicycle. I visited Paris with a bicycle. It's phenomenal, right? Next mega trend, autonomous driving, right? It's clear, right? I mean, everyone now is talking about, and for 10 years this was only in many tech blogs, etc. Now it's in every newspaper, in every show. We're talking about partly or fully enabled driving. There are 5 steps in autonomous driving, starting with what you have today, what you know from Tesla. But it's not only Tesla. Your Audi Q5 can drive 220 kilometers per hour on a German autobahn today, completely autonomous, right? Nothing will happen. You can read a newspaper. You're not allowed, but you could, right? And this car also brakes smoothly down if it realizes there's a traffic jam, etc. But it does not mean that you can turn around and read the newspaper or sleeping, etc. So that's something that is massive. On-demand mobility. What is if your shuttle would know, or my shuttle would know, I have to go to the airport pretty quickly after my speech, and if the shuttle just would wait there because it would know from my schedule that I have to go to the airport. Same for you, every day commuting. You're leaving your home, shuttle is waiting for you, on-demand mobility, so there's no useless transport anymore. Safer traffic, it's a clear thing when machines drive better than humans, and that is simply by how computers can react and the time they can react. There's a lot of discussion about that, I know, but that's something that we can take as given, whereas I heard a speech last week on another conference of the CEO of a big car maker, and he said, we will not have crashless autonomous driving unless we don't have autonomous animals in the forest. You know what I mean. Logistics, big thing, right? The platooning of trucks. Today trucks have, I don't know, something like 200, 300 meter distance if they go on a highway, etc. They could go with 5 to 10 meters if you just lock them like a chain, right? And the truck locks into that platoon, and then they drive 400 kilometers and then unlocks. Big thing into that. Software defines the car. Software takes over the world. I mean, this is why we're here and what we're realizing. It's true with the car as well. The value chain in automotive for countries like Germany, like the US, it's massive because the economy is depending so much on it. The value chain is shifting completely. So because it used to be building hardware. Now it's about programming software, right? It's also that there's commodity. You can source a car, the chassis and everything, even more in electromobility, and you build something around that's massively different. So that has a massive economical impact, e-mobility I mentioned. So what does it mean to all of us, to you? So let's look into that, and I just picked, the numbers are not from me, of course, these are from Roland Berger, but let's look into the next 15 years, right? So how does the world look by Roland Berger in 2030? We will have pretty much everything that we have today, so it's not that we're flying around, etc. It's not this type of fifth element. So there will be private commercial ownership, right? And there will be public transport, what you see here. But they say in 15 years only, we will have a massive fleet of robocabs, right? I mean, there was this headline a couple of weeks ago, Uber is about to order 100,000 S-Class from Mercedes, self-driving S-Classes, right? I asked the head of Uber of Uber Germany last week, he said it's a rumor. I would say the same, right? But probably not true. Or looking into that, OEM are the original engineering manufacturers, which are the car makers, BMW, Audi, Dacia, Renault, etc. So on the top, we have the revenues, right? And this means doesn't really change too much if you look into what's going on. And on the left side, we have revenues, right? So, of course, in RoboCabs, there are no revenues, right? So, interesting is if you jump to the margin, to the profit, right? And this is something that's massive, that autonomous driving fleets and RoboCabs in only 15 years will outsell private ownership and transport services by far. Oops, sorry. So this also leads to the fact, and you know all this, that companies, and was mentioned yesterday here, I mean, Uber valuation at 50 billion or 60 billion, who knows? Who knows? It's just that there's a strong belief that anything about mobility, from India through the United States, from Russia to Africa, will be massively disrupted, and the new kid on the block is Uber, so everyone is believing into that. And if you look into that, I mean, who's imagining that, right? I mean, usually the value of a company was also measured by the assets they had, their balance sheets, the revenues, etc. Massive companies are in fight with a new kid on the block that is around for a couple of years. So that's interesting. I met this guy, Kylie, here on that car, and Tim, is Tim here? I learned that he was an investor. He backed Kylie. I didn't know that. So that's 2015. A guy from Silicon Valley, a smart guy, of course, in his late 20s. He said, okay, all these autonomous driving hype, that's great, but there are so many cars already, the installed base on the roads. Why not just going to your repair shop and buying a kit and making your car autonomous driving, even if the car is 5 years old? It's a dream. He built it, cruise automation. We met 2 years ago in the Valley, and it's something, I mean, if you're in this industry, you have to understand production cycles, planning cycles are usually something like 7 to 10 years, or let's say 5 years in preparation and then production, etc. So in terms of funding, in terms of business modeling, in terms of startup, automotive mobility was for centuries, for years, for decades, a no-go for any VC. This happened a couple of weeks ago. This guy sold his company for over $1 billion to General Motors, right? And that is something that's going on at the moment, and that's something that also, I think, from an entrepreneurship point of view, is creating complete new opportunities. So 38 hours per year spends every single American citizen on a traffic jam. Now you can imagine that kids are not allowed to drive and not everyone has a car, right? So if you only would put this on those who spending their life in traffic, it's probably 2 months per year. That's a lot. Are you looking into that? And you know that. I mean, we all heard about that. The Earth will turn into an urban area, right? Almost 3/4 of mankind will live in cities. We will see mega cities. And I mean, Cluj is okay, Berlin is fine, right? But go to Jakarta, go to Beijing, go to Bangkok, go to Sao Paulo. The traffic is the most fundamental issue that we will face in future and that we have to get into control. And if you see the numbers, it's not far away, right? Most of you, most of us will see this and will realize it. So we don't talk about in 100 years. Apple puts $1 billion in a hailing app in China. This is serious. This is serious. Apple is building a car, we know that, right? But a company who actually changed the way how we communicate so massively is now investing into mobility, right? So that's why I'm calling this the third age. So where's the beef? How's the business going? There are just, I mean, we don't have too much time here, and I found this analogy what I liked. People always need this analogy, right? So if you pitch your startup to a VC, you always need these claims like, oh, it's like Instagram, but for cats, right? So this is pretty much, it's Amazon for mobility, or Apple of mobility. Actually, it just takes a learned business model or business understanding to see. So we will see aggregators of mobility, and that's what we just said. I said there will be your own car, public transport, etc. I just listed some of them. But you need to have access to that, right? You need to apply for the bike sharing, and you need to have a membership with the car sharing, and there's a public transport that you don't want to pay extra, and so on and so forth. So there will be businesses who are offering that. So then there will be the Apple of mobility, integrated services, own fleets of cars or whatever car then will be, right? Tula, that was one of the company at one of the first slides, company from Portugal. They're doing self-driving public transport systems, and they deploy them now in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, etc. So it's a little bit what most of us know from airport. If you go from one terminal to the other, there's a moving system, no driver, right? Or the Dell of mobility, and I will talk about this a little bit more in a second, where we have to trigger those certain elements in a value chain to make it working and being specific, good on this respective point. What does that say? www.ff.com. Does it ring a bell? No, you out of, no. What does it mean? Here we go. It's We Are FF. Faraday Future. Anyone heard of it? Okay. Some, of course. You're tech guys, you have to. Faraday Future. What is that? The company was created 2014. That is 2 years ago, right? They introduced this year in January this stellar car, right? I mean, this is Tesla as a racing car plus Porsche, etc. It's amazing. And they will launch this car in 2017. Remember, I just said a normal car has a planning cycle of about 11 years, right? Oh, wow. No, it's not a startup. They invest $1 billion to build a mega factory in Nevada next to Tesla, right? It's backed by Chinese billionaires, and that is something that's the world we're living in, right? But it's not only Faraday Future. There are way more, right? We will all see that all the brands we know, some will survive. There will be BMW in 20 years, and there will be probably Audi in 10 years. But there are new ones to come. Next TV, another Chinese startup, if you want so, with billions of dollars. Or Thunder Power, right? I mean, this sounds very Chinese, Thunder Power. They made home appliances, I think, dishwashers. They now do electric cars, right? So this OSV means open source vehicle. It's a company from Milan, right? They have an open source community to plan a car, and they have a little platform that you can buy as a community, and it's not big, it's not a Tesla, but it's community fleets and golf cars, etc. Download the blueprints, start to build your car. Local Motors, Lenovo, Reva, etc. So as we speak here, the fundamental rules, how mobility was provided to you, and the control, right? And this massive margin most of the car makers had, not all of them, they're cyclic, we know that, but it's vaporizing, Because electromobility means something different. The knowledge is not in the engine, not in the powertrain, right? The knowledge is in an engine that everyone can build. It's about the service around. It's about to bring the service to people. So that's the question that we should ask all of us, right? What does it mean to entrepreneurs? And I talked about Kylie and the opportunities here. So first of all, you remember that picture. There are various angles to attack, right? So if you say, okay, I want to provide mobility, you have chances to build new services. Uber is the best example. Uber is an aggregator, is a provider. Uber is the biggest mobility supplier in the world these days. They do not own a single car, right? I mean, we know this, Airbnb is doing this with hotels and so on, right? So the apple of mobility, build a car. I just showed you. A good friend of mine called me last year and said, Holger, we have to build a car, right? And you will see this. Entrepreneurs will to start building cars with single purpose in local environments where they say, okay, this car only is for Singapore with very specific, but it's possible you source it somewhere. Or build tech enablers. This means software, but this also means really deep tech, Bluetooth Low Energy, etc. So what does it mean? There will be startups that will provide this mobility access that I'm talking about, right? So how great would this be if I just would have one customer relation? It's like mobility roaming, right? And you jump on a car in Paris, and then you go with the car to the airport, and then you go with the Heathrow Express to the city, and there you take a bike. And you just take them because you have someone providing you that access, right? On-demand mobility, the use case is obvious, right? There's a club somewhere in a city, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, we know there are 20 people who want to go in a certain direction. There must be a service fulfilling that. Not 15 cabs lining up, just a bus, right? My mobility brand, that's what I said, my next car will be a Google or whatever, right? There will be fashion brands doing cars. There was a survey a couple of years ago, 2 years ago in the Valley, where McKinsey and Wired asked people between 19 and 25 years old, if you have to use an autonomous driving car every day, which brand you would buy it from, right? And under the first 5 answers, there was one car maker, which was Tesla. And number 1 was Google, number 2 was Apple. And ecosystem enablers, that's what I said. Those are the bits and pieces, right? Like in 2003, everything was there. We had 3G networks, we had Java-enabled phones, we had ringtones, we had gaming, etc. But it took another 7 years to make this a multi-billion-dollar app economy. Why that? Because the services, the pieces of the ecosystem were not connected. They did not tick. There were technical issues, right? I mean, to set up a web browser back in 2003, you had to study computer science. Or simply economical things that if you just looked up in your web browser the soccer results from the weekend, it cost you something like $7 because there was no data flat fee. So in all of that, we will see massive explosion of startups. We will see a lot of money getting into that, and it will change all our lives in the third edge of mobility. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Holger. Very much appreciated. So the only question which you didn't answer is, you showed a lot of billion-dollar opportunities.
Yeah.
So what can we expect from you?
$1 billion opportunity.
Okay, that's fantastic.
You will read about it.
I wish you all the best of luck of it, and I hope I hear more off stage about it.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Holger. It was a pleasure having you here.
Thank you.